but I was also a musician at the same time. And so because I could read and write music and speak the language, and I understood how the guys in the band feel, I could relate to the musicians because I am a musician. And
Absolutely. And you got
that's
that
what
ear.
happened.
Now tell me about Girls Time. How did that work? But before we get into that, isn't today a special day for you?
It is a special day. It's my mother's birthday, April
That's
8th.
okay. That's what I thought. So let's
And
say happy birthday.
my mother, above all people, is the one who really is responsible for me becoming a musician. She literally had to go on 2 buses twice a week to take me down into Cleveland proper. I grew up in Cleveland Heights, but she'd take 2 buses to take me to piano lessons in Cleveland every week. And
Oh,
she just encouraged me. So yeah, happy birthday, Mom.
absolutely. I knew it was something I wanted to say to make sure we got that in.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about Girls Time. Tell me about
Well,
that.
in 1988, I had moved up from Los Angeles to the Bay Area, having already a lot of experience owning studios in LA. We moved up to the Bay Area because my wife hated LA. She just wanted out of LA. And we moved up here, and I wound up taking over the plant recording studios. Uh, but I was really more interested in developing new artists. I had always signed and developed artists in LA. And when I moved up here, I was thinking, well, there's a lot of small groups all over the United States that are singing and dancing and rapping, such as The New Edition and Bobby Brown and Color Me Bad. And there were no little girl groups. And I thought to myself, there ought to be a little girl group that can sing, dance, and rap. And I'm going to see if I can't put one together. So I thought I'd form one in the Bay Area, but then I looked around the United States and did a bit of a search. And I found a group that existed in Texas, a bunch of girls. They were 9 and 10 years old, actually.
Oh, okay.
And they were in Houston, and they would rehearse at Matthew and Tina Knowles' house, which was also Beyonce's house, because that was her parents, Matthew Knowles and Tina Knowles. And so I contacted them, and they invited me to come to Houston, and I flew to Houston on my own. And they auditioned for me, and I thought they were just the greatest group. They were called Girls Time. They had 2 gals that were managing them. Matthew was not involved. No, the parents were not involved in the management company. There was a couple of gals that were managing them. The one that I worked with was named Ann Tillman. And I thought they were just great. So I offered them a contract to sign them to my label. I flew them out to San Francisco. I put them up in the Holiday Inn Hotel in Mill Valley, which is right next to Sausalito. And Sausalito is where the Plant Recording Studios is. I took them in the studio, and we did a whole album of songs that were either covers or they were originals that the girls wrote. And one of the things that happened during the course of the production was that Beyonce wasn't originally the lead singer in the group. The lead singer was a girl named Ashley. And Ashley was a much more mature girl. She was taller than all the rest of the girls, and she was stronger as a vocalist. But she didn't have the kind of stage presence that you need in a group. When you have a group, you need someone to get up front on the mic who can really engage the audience, somebody that has charisma. And when I saw Beyonce perform, I thought, well, that girl has charisma. So I encouraged her to become the lead vocalist. And actually, as we did the album, we had her sing more of the leads than the girl that was originally the lead singer in the group. So we did a full album. After that, I wanted to get the album placed because one of my goals in signing groups is to do more than just bring them in the studio and make the record. I've always liked to follow through and make sure the record gets heard and seen by the public. And the way to do that back in 1990, unlike today when you can release a record yourself and have it heard and seen, back in those days, you had to go to a major label and get it released through Columbia or Warner Brothers or Elektra, some label that had marketing clout and could get that record on the radio. So we got the girls on the American Idol show of its day, which was called Star Search with Ed McMahon.
I remember that.
I got them on that show, and Girls Time performed on that show. And unfortunately, it was a great disappointment because they didn't win, and the group they were competing against won over them. And really, everyone who saw the show thought the Girls Time should have won, but they did not win, and they were very disappointed. I also sent the tape that I had made of their album to Prince, because I had a relationship with Prince. I was working with him in the recording studio every month. And so I said, I know you started your own label. I wonder if you would consider these girls. And he called me on the phone and said, I love the tape. I love these girls. I'll sign them to my label. So that was very exciting, although nothing happened. Unlike some other fields where people tell you things. In the music field, people tell you things, and sometimes it happens and a lot of times it doesn't. You know, Prince was a touring artist who had plenty going on in his life. And he had, at the time, he had Shaka Khan signed to his label. He had Larry Graham signed to his label. And I think he just had more on his plate than he really could handle. But I was very excited. The girls were very excited about getting signed to Prince's label. That didn't happen. Star Search didn't happen. And the third thing was, there's a gal named Suzanne DePass who told Berry Gordy, you got to sign Michael Jackson.
Right.
She was the gal who really advised Berry Gordy to sign Michael Jackson when he wasn't that impressed with the Jackson 5. And at the time that I was in touch with her, through a girl that worked for her named Ruth Carson. Ruth was to head up the management division for Suzanne DePass's company, and she had just produced a TV series called Lonesome Dove. And so at that time, Suzanne DePass had transitioned to becoming a very big deal in Hollywood as a television producer. And the fact that they were going to sign the girls as a management company was a very big deal. And that didn't happen because Ruth Carson got offered to be the VP at Sony Music in New York, and she took that job. So we had come very close to getting a major deal for the girls. We didn't get. We shopped it to Sylvia Rohn at Elektra. They signed the girls to a deal and had a producer do some songs. And then when they had a whole album done that they thought were going to release on Elektra, they dropped the girls.
Aww.
So the Girls Time had a lot of disappointments that led to them breaking up. And of course, the next group was called Destiny's Child.
Hey, history was made.
History
well, at least you had your hands in it. You had your hands in it.
Well,
now, tell me,
I was involved. That's
exactly,
for sure.
Exactly. Now tell me this. I know the history of the Plant Recording Studio, but our audience doesn't. So maybe you can kind of let them know how the Plant Recording Studio was one of the world's most famous recording studios in the world. And you owned it from 88 until 2008, like 33 years. So talk about a little bit about the history of the plant and then some of the people that have recorded there, because I know Rick James actually used to live there. So talk to us about it. Give us some history.
Rick James and also Sly Stone. Sly
Yes.
Stone had a bedroom in the building. So okay, the record plant, Los Angeles, was the king of recording facilities in LA, which, as you know, is Recording Central.
Yes.
And in the 70s, in the early 70s, there was this stage of independent recording studios where everybody wanted to get away from the centers. They wanted to get out of New York, or they wanted to get out of LA, get away from the record companies who would drop in on the sessions, or get away from their families who would drop in on the sessions. And so the first of the sort of resort studios was built by Chicago, the band Chicago's manager, Jim Guercio, and that was outside of Boulder, Colorado, out in the country. And everybody thought that was great. So the Record Plant LA, being competitive, said, well, we're going to build a resort studio that's away from LA. So they found a building in Sausalito, California, which, as you know, is just over the Golden Gate Bridge. And they built the Record Plant Sausalito in 1972. And it was famous from the day it opened because it was part of the Record Plant LA, which was already famous. Just to give you an idea of how famous, they had John Lennon and Yoko Ono were at the grand opening party, which was Halloween 1972.
Wow.
So what made the studio famous in the 70s was Fleetwood Mac did the album Rumors at the studio. And bands like the Jefferson Airplane, the Jefferson Starship, all the San Francisco famous bands like Huey Lewis in the 80s did his famous records there. Journey, one of San Francisco's most famous bands, did their records there. Prince did his first album when he got signed to Warner Brothers there.
Yes.
At the Record Plant in Sausalito.
Yeah.
So all throughout the 70s and the 80s, Aretha Franklin came to the plant and did Who's Zooming Who and Freeway of Love, which was her comeback pop
Now,
hit.
wasn't that the one that Narada Michael Walden produced, right?
He did.
Yes.
Narada at that time did not own his own studio, and so he worked at the plant.
Okay.
Until the Whitney Houston project, and the first Whitney Houston project that Narada did, he also did that at the plant. And I remember working with Dave Frazier on tuning some of the vocals that we worked on the Whitney Houston project. So yeah, Narada worked there. Carlos pretty much did all his records there. In the middle 80s, starting in the early 80s, Rick James, he did most famous record that Rick James did there is Super Freak. She's super freaky.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know he did that there. Cool.
Yeah, and that record has been sampled by so many hip hop artists. I mean,
It's just a great record, though.
She's super freaky.
Now, you know, I just interviewed Carlos Stanfield, and we talked about the Tonys and when they came to the plant. What was it like working with those guys?
Well, it was very exciting because I had moved up from Los Angeles and I had just taken over the studio. And it was, in my mind, it was known as a rock and roll studio. And I thought, well, I'm going to finally get a chance to do some Northern California rock and roll. And the very first project I actually did there was the Tony record, which was a great R&B record. And I think, I'm not sure about the timing of this, but I'm pretty sure that I had just done, or I was right around the time I was doing Gerald Levert's first record.
It was, because that was right around the time when you had told me you were going to do it. And I remember before you even did the Tonys, because I introduced you to Carlos.
Right.
Now, you had a Halloween party. Do you remember that wonderful Halloween costume party?
Oh, yeah. I sure do. Yeah. I think the first party, I don't know which one you're referring to, because we did one every year.
I know, but I think it was the first one. I
dressed up. I had a lion costume.
That was it.
And my wife came as a lion tamer.
Okay.
And she had the whip and a top hat. It was pretty funny. Yeah.
Yes, I love that.
We did it. I opened up because the people in the city were so interested in what was going on in this building that had Carlos Santana and Too Short and E40 and all these Rick James and Sly Stone. So once a year on Halloween I would open up the doors to the whole city and invite everybody.
Yeah.
And we would have, we usually had maybe 20-30 people in the building. We'd have 400 or 500 people come to that Halloween party every year. It was a blast.
They were wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Okay, so you know what? Just thinking about all of this right now, is really just taking me back to that time. It was incredible. Now I want you to talk about your new venture, the Plant Studio Records. So let's talk about that, what that all entails and what you're looking for.
Well, the idea of starting the record label came to me from a friend who had finished on his own a beautiful classical album. And the irony of this first release on our label is that although my background as a piano player is classical music, and I studied classical music and I grew up with it, in my professional career as an engineer and a producer, I hardly ever worked on classical music at all.
Mm.
All my records that I've done are either R&B, pop, or rock, almost entirely. And then my first 10 years in the business, I did jazz albums, almost exclusively. Well, on Venice Beach, I did jazz and R&B. So for me to have released as the first record on the Plant Studios Records, the name of our label, I call it the Plant Studios Records, as opposed to the Plant Studios Records. The reason I call it that way as a verb instead of a noun is because that's what we do at the
Okay,
plant.
record, okay.
We make records and we record. And so I wanted to emphasize that. But the thing about the label was a guy had this beautiful classical album. He's a virtuoso banjo player, but he composes classical symphonies. And he wrote a symphony for banjo and orchestra. Then he went over to Prague and he recorded it with the Prague Metropolitan Orchestra. His name is Tim Weed. And Tim's a Marin County guy who lives in Ross and who is brilliant musician and composer. And when he played me this piece of music, I said, well, this is such a beautiful piece. He said, but I can't figure out how to get it seen and heard by the public. And that's what I've been doing my whole career as a studio owner. I've been finding people that I thought were talent and backing them and trying to have the public see and hear their music. So I told Tim, well, I believe I could get your record seen and heard because I have a distribution deal with a very good company and we can distribute to all the DSPs like Spotify and Apple Music and Tidal, etc. So we released this record and then I realized that having a label was a most direct continuation of what I've been doing my whole career as a studio owner and engineer, which is finding a new act that has great new music and placing it. Because if you make the record, but you don't get it seen and heard, what was the point of all that hard work?